Can death itself be fooled by cruelty, science, and fate? And what happens when existence continues without breath, without voice, without mercy? Welcome to Classic Storytime Hub. Tonight, we present Loss of Breath by Edgar Allan Poe, a darkly satirical and unsettling tale, reimagined and retold in English, where life and death blur into a grotesque nightmare.
Misfortune, no matter how relentless, always seems to surrender eventually, not to force, but to persistence. History is littered with proud fortresses that believed themselves unbreakable, only to fall to patience. Cities resisted for years, decades even, until time itself turned traitor. Nothing holds forever. I believed the same principle applied to marriage. The morning after my wedding, standing face to face with the woman who was now legally bound to me, something ancient and irrational snapped. Words, vile, reckless words, poured out of my mouth. Insults stacked upon insults, each sharper than the last, my voice rising with a confidence that bordered on madness. I leaned closer, too close. My fingers closed around her throat as I prepared to deliver the final, most devastating phrase, one that would leave no doubt of her worthlessness. And then, nothing. No sound. No breath. No voice. My mouth was open, my chest straining, my body demanding air that simply refused to come. The moment shattered. Panic flooded in. Horror followed close behind. People say they're out of breath every day. They joke about losing it. I had never considered, never even imagined, that such words could become literal, that breath itself could vanish, that life's most basic function could quietly abandon me without warning. If you possess even a spark of imagination, try to picture it. The shock, the disbelief, the creeping certainty that something fundamental had gone terribly wrong. Yet, strangely, I did not collapse. Some fragment of reason, some stubborn guardian spirit remained intact within me. Even at my most unrestrained, a sense of order clung to my thoughts. Emotion, wild as it was, eventually guided me back toward cold reflection, toward philosophy, toward survival. I could not yet determine how deeply this catastrophe had altered me. Was it temporary, permanent, fatal? I had no answers. So I made a decision. I would tell no one, least of all my wife. Until I understood the true extent of this unheard-of affliction, I would hide it, observe it, endure it, and pretend for as long as possible that nothing essential had been lost at all. I forced my face to change, instantly reshaping it from swollen fury into something playful, almost charming. A smile appeared where rage had lived seconds before. I tapped my wife lightly on one cheek, kissed the other, and, without uttering a single word, turned and glided out of the room. Not because I chose silence, because I had no other option. I left her frozen in confusion, watching as I spun away with theatrical flair, exiting like a man performing the final step of an absurd dance. Only when I reached the safety of my private chamber did the truth fully settle in. Here I was, alive, yet borrowing traits from the dead, dead, yet cursed with the restless instincts of the living, a contradiction made flesh, calm in mind, empty of breath. Yes, completely breathless.
I am not exaggerating. I could not have moved a single feather with my lungs had my life depended on it. Not a trace of air, not even enough to fog a mirror. Fate, it seemed, had played a cruel joke, yet even despair offered a small, bitter mercy. Through careful testing, I made a discovery. My voice, so abruptly silenced during my outburst, was not entirely gone. It had merely changed.
Speech was still possible, but only if forced into a deep, unnatural growl, dragged from the throat rather than carried by breath. This sound came not from air, but from violent tension, muscles clenching and spasming to imitate what life once did effortlessly. Had I known this moments earlier, I might have continued my tirade in that monstrous register. I collapsed into a chair and surrendered to thought. No comfort awaited me there. My mind filled with dark, weeping fantasies, catastrophes layered upon catastrophes. For a fleeting moment, even the idea of ending my own life crept in. But such is the perversity of human nature. We recoil from what is immediate and obvious, only to entertain distant, uncertain horrors instead. I shuddered at the thought of self-destruction as the most unforgivable sin. And all the while, mockery surrounded me. The tabby cat purred smugly at my feet. The dog beneath the table wheezed and snorted with energetic devotion. Every breath they took sounded deliberate, proud, excessive, as if each creature in the room had conspired to flaunt the very thing I no longer possessed. Crushed beneath a storm of indistinct hopes and creeping fears, I finally heard my wife's footsteps fading down the staircase. The sound loosened something tight around my chest. She was gone. Certain of my solitude, I returned, heart hammering, to the birthplace of my calamity. I locked the door carefully from the inside. This was not a search to be interrupted. With desperate resolve, I began to examine every inch of the room. I reasoned, wildly perhaps, that what I had lost might still exist somewhere nearby, hidden, waiting, tucked into a shadowed corner, slipped behind a drawer, lurking inside a forgotten closet. Breath, after all, might be vapor, or it might, by some grotesque miracle, have weight, substance, shape. Philosophers are rarely as logical as they claim. One of them once argued that only invisible things are real, and standing there, hunting for my missing breath, I was inclined to agree. Before dismissing such ideas as absurd, the thoughtful mind should hesitate. After all, history is generous with impossible truths. Men have sworn snow was black, and I have since learned that under the right conditions, it truly is. I searched relentlessly. I overturned furniture, I rifled through drawers, I opened boxes I had not touched in years, and after all that effort, all that hope, the miserable harvest of my labor amounted to this: a set of false teeth, 2 artificial hips, a glass eye, and a bundle of love letters addressed to my wife from a certain Mr. Windenough. I should note, for the sake of honesty, that this discovery unsettled me very little. That my wife should favor a man so thoroughly unlike myself seemed not only possible, but inevitable. I am known to possess a broad and sturdy frame, solid, compact, and unapologetically heavy, paired with a stature that might generously be called modest. Mr. Windenough, by contrast, was a marvel of narrowness, tall to the point of legend, thin as a rail. His height alone had become a subject of public admiration. Naturally, such a figure would captivate her eye, and so I dismissed the matter without bitterness. But I digress. For none of these objects, grotesque though they were, had any relation whatsoever to the thing I sought most desperately. My breath was still missing, and the room, stripped bare of secrets, offered no explanation at all. As I had feared, every effort ended in failure. Closets after closet, drawer after drawer, corner after corner. I searched until the room itself seemed exhausted, yet nothing revealed itself. At one fleeting moment, hope surged. While tearing through a dressing case, I shattered a bottle of perfumed oil. The scent burst into the air so vividly that I nearly convinced myself I had found what I was looking for. For the record, the fragrance was excellent, warm, sharp, and strangely uplifting. I would recommend it under happier circumstances. But it was not my breath. Defeated, I returned to my private chamber, my thoughts already racing toward escape. One truth had become painfully clear. I could not remain, at least not here, not under my wife's scrutiny. I resolved to leave the country. In a foreign land, among strangers who knew nothing of my former voice, I might succeed in hiding my affliction. This loss, I felt, was worse than poverty. Beggars might earn pity, even affection. A man without breath would inspire only revulsion, suspicion, moral outrage. The righteous despise what they cannot explain. My hesitation did not last long. A solution presented itself, unexpected, theatrical, and absurd enough to work. I committed an entire tragedy to memory. The play was Metamora, and fortune favored me. The hero's role demanded no variation in tone, no delicate modulation of breath. The voice was meant to remain low, heavy, guttural, monotonous as a drumbeat. Precisely the register still available to me. I practiced relentlessly, not on a stage, but beside a marsh where my unnatural sounds would attract no concern. This was no borrowed technique from ancient orators. It was a strategy born purely of necessity. There, among reeds and stagnant water, I refined my new voice until it echoed like something dredged from the earth itself. Fully prepared, I returned home. I informed my wife, with grave seriousness, that I had been struck by a sudden and overwhelming passion for the theater. She believed me. Miraculously, completely. From that moment forward, every question she asked, every comment she made, was met with a response delivered in my deepest, most tomb-like croak, always a line from the tragedy. I soon discovered, to my private delight, that any passage would suffice. Love, annoyance, hunger, disagreement, each could be answered convincingly with the same solemn verse. And so, cloaked in drama and deception, I continued to live, breathless, performing, and dangerously close to being believed. It must not be imagined that my performances lacked enthusiasm. On the contrary, I perfected every gesture the public had come to adore, the crooked glances, the exaggerated baring of teeth, the restless knees, the dragging shuffle of feet. All those unspeakable flourishes now mistaken for talent were mine in abundance. Some even suggested, half in jest, that I ought to be restrained for my intensity. Yet never, not once, did suspicion wander anywhere near the truth. No one imagined I had lost my breath. With my affairs finally settled, I departed at dawn one morning, taking a seat aboard the mail coach bound for a distant city. I made certain my acquaintances understood that matters of grave importance demanded my immediate presence there. Urgency, I have learned, discourages questions. The coach was packed beyond comfort, bodies pressed against bodies. In the dim uncertainty of early twilight, faces dissolved into indistinct shadows. I offered no resistance as I was wedged tightly between two men of enormous build. A third, larger still, apologized politely for the liberty he was about to take, then sprawled acrossly at full length. He fell asleep instantly. His snoring was catastrophic. It thundered through the carriage, drowning out every guttural sound I attempted in protest. The noise was so violent it might have shamed ancient engines of torture. Fortunately, or perhaps ironically, my peculiar condition made suffocation impossible. A man without breath cannot be smothered. When daylight finally crept in as we approached the city's edge, my tormentor stirred. Rising, he adjusted his collar and thanked me warmly for my patience. I did not respond. I could not. My body remained rigid, my limbs twisted into unnatural angles, my head lolled sharply to one side. Concern crept into his face. Alarm followed. He shook me once, then harder. Receiving no reaction, he woke the remaining passengers and announced, loudly and with conviction, that a corpse had been smuggled aboard during the night, passed off as a living, fare-paying traveler. To emphasize his conclusion, he struck me smartly beneath the eye. The coach erupted. Cries, recoiling bodies, shouts for help, and there I sat, silent, twisted, unbreathing, appearing for all the world to be exactly what he claimed: dead. What followed was a unanimous act of civic responsibility. One by one, 9 of them in total, each passenger felt compelled to tug me sharply by the ear, as though truth itself might be shaken loose by brute confirmation. A young physician, fresh into practice and eager for authority, produced a pocket mirror and held it to my mouth. No mist, no warmth, no sign of breath. That settled it. The accusation was confirmed beyond dispute, the verdict unanimous. The company declared, with great moral outrage, that they would no longer tolerate such deception, nor permit themselves to be conveyed alongside corpses masquerading as living men. Their solution was immediate. As the coach passed a roadside tavern known as the Crow, I was hurled unceremoniously into the open air. My removal caused little inconvenience to them. To me, it resulted in both arms snapping cleanly beneath the rear wheel of the carriage. I must, however, offer the driver his due credit. He remembered, quite conscientiously, to throw my largest trunk after me. Fate, ever precise, guided it directly onto my skull. The impact fractured my head in a manner that was, I am told, both impressive and anatomically fascinating. The innkeeper of the Crow was a practical man, generous only when generosity proved profitable. Upon inspecting my trunk and finding its contents sufficient to compensate him for inconvenience, he wasted no time. A surgeon acquaintance was summoned at once. Along with me, he was handed a modest payment, $10, accompanied by a bill and receipt. Thus purchased, I was transported to the surgeon's private rooms and placed upon a table. The examination began without ceremony. My ears were removed first, cleanly, efficiently. It was only then that he noticed something unsettling. Movement. Signs of life. He hesitated, rang for assistance. A neighboring apothecary was called in to consult on the matter. Yet while waiting, just in case his doubts proved unfounded, he proceeded cautiously and decisively. An incision was made in my abdomen. Several internal organs were extracted and set aside, not for any immediate necessity, but for later study, private study. All the while, I remained conscious, breathless, silent, and horrifyingly aware. The apothecary was convinced I was dead. I did everything in my power to prove him wrong. I kicked, I thrashed, I twisted my body into violent, desperate shapes, summoning every fragment of strength I still possessed. The surgeon's earlier work had, in a cruel way, restored enough sensation to make suffering vivid again. Pain sharpened my awareness. Awareness fueled resistance. But my protests were misinterpreted. Every convulsion, every frantic movement was calmly attributed to the effects of a new electrical device. The apothecary, an educated man proud of his learning, declared my reactions a promising result of galvanic stimulation. He conducted experiment after experiment, each more inventive than the last. I was, quite unwillingly, the centerpiece of his scientific curiosity. I found myself deeply involved in these trials, painfully involved. What tormented me most, however, was not the procedure, but silence. I tried to speak, I tried to argue, I tried to dismantle their imaginative theories, each more absurd than the last. Under normal circumstances, my familiarity with medical doctrine would have allowed me to dismantle their conclusions with ease. yet my voice betrayed me entirely. My mouth would not open, no sound emerged, not even a whisper. Unable to reach a conclusion, the practitioners postponed judgment. I was carried upstairs to a narrow attic. The surgeon's wife, displaying a domestic kindness entirely unsuited to the moment, dressed me in drawers and stockings. The surgeon himself secured my wrists, bound my jaw tightly with a handkerchief, and, without ceremony, locked the door from the outside. Dinner awaited him. I was left behind, alone, restrained, trapped in silence with my thoughts. And then, joy! A sudden electric realization surged through me. I could have spoken. If not for the cloth binding my mouth, I would have been able to speak freely. The discovery filled me with a strange comfort. I clung to it like a promise. Reassured, I allowed my mind to drift, repeating familiar passages of devotional reflection, my habitual ritual before surrendering to sleep. That was when the scratching began. Through a jagged hole in the wall, 2 cats slipped inside, lean, ravenous creatures with eyes gleaming like accusation. They leapt forward with theatrical flair, landing directly upon my face, one on each side, balanced, deliberate. Then they began to fight. Their prize was insignificant, petty, utterly worthless. My nose. Claws flashed, fur bristled, hissing filled the room as they battled over it with indecent enthusiasm, while I lay beneath them, bound, breathless, and fully conscious of every second. History, it seems, has always rewarded mutilation with opportunity. Men have lost ears and gained kingdoms. Others surrendered their noses only to claim empires. In much the same way, though on a humbler scale, the loss of a few unimportant portions of my face became the unlikely salvation of the rest of my body. Pain woke something feral inside me. Rage followed instantly. With a single violent effort, I tore through the restraints. The bindings snapped, the cloth fell from my mouth. I rose, unsteady but unstoppable, and crossed the room with deliberate menace. The cats froze. I offered them one look, pure, exhausted contempt, then flung open the window. Their shock was magnificent. Before fear could settle, I launched myself outward, cleanly, decisively, into open air. Below me, at that precise and cursed moment, fate was already in motion. A condemned highwayman, a man to whom I bore an uncanny resemblance, was being transported from the city jail to the gallows waiting beyond the suburbs. Years of illness had earned him a small mercy, no chains. Dressed in execution garments nearly identical to my own, he lay stretched along the bottom of the hangman's cart. The timing was perfect. The guard was asleep. 2 infantry recruits staggered beside the cart, drunk beyond responsibility. And I landed, on my feet, inside the vehicle. Understood instantly. In a flash of animal intelligence, he sprang up, vaulted over the side, vanished down a narrow alley, and disappeared from the world. By the time the recruits stirred, he was already gone. They blinked, they stared, they tried valiantly to think. Before them stood a man identical to the condemned criminal. Same build, same clothing, same position. The conclusion required little effort. They exchanged nods, took a drink, confirmed their shared wisdom. Then, with the confidence of men convinced they had stopped an escape, they brought the butts of their muskets down upon me, hard, efficient, and without hesitation. Darkness followed. It did not take long for us to reach the final stop. There was no trial, no explanation, no defense. Execution was inevitable. I accepted it in a haze, half numb, half bitter. I was no philosopher at heart, no hardened cynic. My emotions were simpler, more instinctive. Like a dog, I understood fear, confusion, and loyalty to life, even when life had already abandoned me. The hangman did his work with practiced calm. The rope tightened around my neck. The the platform dropped. What followed defies description, and I will not attempt it. To write honestly about the gallows, one must have stood upon it. Experience is the only authority worth trusting. Every writer should remain faithful to what he has endured. One does not theorize about drunkenness without having been drunk. I will say only this: I did not die. My body was suspended, yes, but without breath there was nothing to suffocate. Had it not been for the knot pressing beneath my ear, stiff as a soldier's collar, I suspect the inconvenience would have been minimal. The violent snap of the drop corrected nothing more than an old twist in my neck, a souvenir left behind by the obese gentleman in the mail coach. Still, for reasons of prudence, I made an effort to perform. The crowd, after all, had expectations. I convulsed with enthusiasm. My spasms were said to be remarkable, perhaps unmatched. The audience responded warmly. Applause followed. Several gentlemen fainted outright. A number of ladies were carried away in hysterics. An artist in attendance seized the moment, later retouching his celebrated depiction of a man flayed alive using sketches made from my movements on the rope. When the entertainment had sufficiently run its course, the authorities decided it was time to remove my body from the gallows. This decision was made easier by a late discovery. The true criminal had been recaptured, identified, confirmed. A fact which, unfortunately for me, I did not yet know.
Sympathy, of course, had been offered in abundance. No one claimed my body, and so it was ordered that I be interred in a public vault. After the necessary ceremonies, I was deposited in that cold, silent crypt. The sexton departed, and I was left utterly alone. A line from Marston's Malcontent floated through my mind. Death's a good fellow and keeps open house. A lie, an unforgivable, palpable lie. I pushed off the lid of my coffin and stepped into the damp gloom. The air was heavy, fetid, and oppressive. Ennui settled over me like a shroud. To amuse myself, I groped among the rows of coffins, examining their orderly ranks. I lifted lids one by one and peered within, pondering the mortality contained inside. "This," I muttered, tumbling over a bloated, grotesque body, "this poor soul has suffered a fate most pitiable. Life has not allowed him to walk with grace, but to lumber, awkward, cumbersome, more elephant than man, more rhinoceros than human. Every effort at progress has faltered. Each step forward has been accompanied by 2 to the right, 3 to the left. His ambitions have circled back upon themselves. His studies, if they may be called that, have been devoted to the poetry of Crabbe, an existence devoid of wonder. He has never danced a pirouette. He has never floated in a pas de papillon. He has never climbed a hill to behold the splendor of the world from above, nor gazed from a steeple upon a city alive with light. Heat tormented him. In the dog days, his days were those of a dog, oppressive, restless, suffocating. He dreamed of flames, of mountains upon mountains, of Pelion upon Ossa. And, to crown the absurdity, he was always short of breath, always. Even the thought of a wind instrument seemed extravagant, impossible, beyond his endurance. Breath, so trivial to others, was a luxury denied to him. He was, without question, a visionary of air and movement, the mind behind self-operating fans, wind-catching sails, and elaborate systems of ventilation, a devoted supporter of bellows-makers and craftsmen of breath. And yet, for all his ingenuity, he met his end in the most humiliating manner imaginable, perishing miserably while attempting to smoke a single cigar. His fate stirred something tender within me. a life so devoted to air, undone by air itself. A tragedy I could not help but respect. "But this one," I muttered, "this one." With sudden spite, I dragged from its resting place a tall, gaunt figure, unnaturally thin, its proportions sharp and unsettling. The moment I saw it, an unpleasant familiarity crept over me. Here lies a creature entirely undeserving of sympathy. To examine it more closely, I seized its nose between thumb and forefinger and propped it upright on the stone floor, holding it at arm's length as I continued my monologue. "Entirely undeserving," I repeated. "Who, after all, would waste compassion on a shadow? Has he not enjoyed every possible advantage life could offer?" I sneered at the lifeless form. He was the architect of towering monuments, shot towers, lightning rods, endless rows of towering poplars piercing the sky. His treatise on shades and shadows ensured his reputation would outlive him. He edited with great authority the final edition of South on the Bones. He entered college early, studied the science of air itself, then returned home to talk endlessly and torment the world with the French horn. I tightened my grip slightly. He admired bagpipes. Captain Barclay, who once raced against time, would never have raced against him. Wyndham and Albraith were his favored authors, his favorite illustrator, Phiz. And his death? Glorious, they said. He expired while inhaling gas, corrupted by the lightest breath, just as fragile virtue is undone by rumor. I paused, savoring the moment. He was, without doubt, "How can you—" The interruption shattered the silence. The figure convulsed. A sharp, desperate gasp tore through the tomb as it clawed violently at the cloth binding its jaws, ripping it free. "How can you, Mr. Lack-a-Breath," it wheezed, struggling for air, "be so infernally cruel as to pinch me by the nose like that?" Sympathy naturally poured in after my supposed demise. No relatives stepped forward to claim what was left of me, so the authorities made a practical decision. I was to be sealed away in a public vault, forgotten with the rest of the unclaimed. And so, after the necessary formalities, I was delivered into darkness. The door closed, footsteps faded, silence settled like damp soil. Someone once wrote that death is a generous host, always welcoming. Standing there, entombed but conscious, I knew that line for what it truly was, a lie dressed as poetry. I pried the coffin open and climbed out. The vault was miserable, cold, wet, suffocatingly dull. With nothing else to occupy my restless mind, I began to wander among the rows of coffins stacked neatly along the walls, touching them, dragging them down one by one, opening them as though browsing a library of forgotten lives. One corpse in particular caught my attention, round, swollen, grotesquely inflated. "Well," I muttered, nudging it aside, "this poor soul never stood a chance." I imagined his life, not walking but wobbling, not moving forward but veering endlessly off course, a man forever defeated by stairs, by hills, by summer heat. Breathing had been his enemy, wind his obsession, air his constant concern. He feared effort, hated music that demanded lungs, invented devices meant to move air so he wouldn't have to, trusted bellows makers, worshipped fans and ventilators, and in the end, irony finished the job. He died choking on a cigar. I felt a strange kinship with him,
Some people are born fighting the air itself.
Then my hand struck something else. Something tall, thin, unnaturally familiar. I yanked the body free and froze. "No," I said quietly. "This one deserves no sympathy at all." I lifted the figure by the nose and propped it upright, holding it away from me like an unpleasant object under inspection. "Who mourns a shadow?" I continued coldly. "You had every advantage. You chased height, worshipped wind, lived to talk and talk and talk. Towers, poles, pipes, horns. Your entire life was an argument with silence." I sneered. "And you still managed to die inhaling gas." The body twitched. Then it spoke. How can you be so cruel?" I nearly dropped it. The figure tore the bindings from its mouth and gasped, not weakly, but violently, as if breath itself were erupting from within him. "Do you have any idea," he continued rapidly without pause, "how unbearable it is to be silenced when one has far too much air to spare?" He didn't wait for an answer. "In my condition, opening my mouth is a blessing. Speaking is salvation. Interruptions, however, are unforgivable. One speaker at a time, sir. You'll have your turn, eventually." I stood frozen as words flooded the vault. "I was walking past your house, yes, your house, right around the time you were busy losing yourself. Ran into Blab on the street. The man never stops talking, never breathes between sentences. Before I knew it, collapse, darkness, silence." He laughed bitterly. "They declared me dead, buried me, and you stood here dissecting my reputation." He paused only to inhale again. "And every word you said was nonsense, lies, absurdities, outrage upon outrage." Then finally, I understood. The breath, the missing breath, the one I had lost during that disastrous argument with my wife. It was here, inside him. The realization struck me like lightning through stone. The air that now animated this furious, unstoppable monologue, the breath sustaining this very speech, was mine. And suddenly, death made sense. Time, place, and circumstance left no doubt. The breath was mine. Yet I did not immediately release my hold on Mr. Windenough's nose, not while he, the self-proclaimed inventor of Lombardy poplars and all things pneumatic, continued to expound upon his theories with relentless fervor. Caution, that old companion of mine, guided my actions. I reflected on the precariousness of my situation. Danger still lurked. Preservation demanded vigilance. Many people, I reasoned, overvalue the things they own or underestimate the things they discard, simply based on the benefits others might reap or the convenience they themselves gain from abandoning them. Could this not be true of Windenough? Perhaps his eagerness to rid himself of this very breath was a trap. Perhaps he intended to exploit my desire for it, demanding payment or favor, taking advantage of the one man foolish enough to reach for what he so casually let slip from his grasp. There are scoundrels in this world, I mused grimly, Epictetus knew it well, who will exploit even a neighbor in need, seizing the moment when disaster makes another most vulnerable. So I kept my grip firm, my fingers pressed just enough, without mercy, as I prepared to respond. "Monster!" I began, my voice vibrating with indignation, almost shaking the vault with it. "Monster! Double-winded idiot! Thou whom heaven has cursed with a twofold respiration for thy endless iniquities, dost thou, I ask, presume to speak to me as if we were old friends? As if familiarity could erase the debts of folly and arrogance? I lie, you say," I thundered, "and hold my tongue, forsooth. Pretty conversation, truly, for a gentleman condemned to a single breath. All this when I alone have the power to relieve the calamity that burdens you, when I alone can curtail the superfluity of your woeful respiration." I paused, like Brutus before Caesar, expecting some measured reply. But Mr. Windenough, like a gale-force wind, immediately swept over me with words. Apologies tumbled upon apologies, protestations upon protestations, each more fervent than the last. Every concession he offered, every promise he made, I seized with the precision of a man starving for air. At last, after negotiations of a most extraordinary sort, the breath was delivered into my possession. I examined it carefully, verified its integrity, and even, by necessity, issued a receipt for its transfer. Some may say I have treated this most intangible of transactions too cursorily, that I ought to have gone into every microscopic detail of an event that might illuminate new corners of physical philosophy. Perhaps they are right. Perhaps I have been remiss. To them I can offer only a hint. Certain circumstances made full disclosure dangerous. A third party, sulky and volatile, was involved, one whose wrath I had no desire to provoke, especially at such a delicate juncture. With the matter thus arranged, we wasted no time in extricating ourselves from the sepulchre's dungeon. Once free, the power of our resuscitated voices became apparent in all its glory. The world had not heard such breathing since breath itself had been invented. Scissors, the Whig editor, soon seized upon the occasion, publishing a treatise on the nature and origin of subterranean noises, inspired doubtless by our extraordinary exertions. And so, in the end, calamity was conquered, absurdity triumphed, and I, finally, was restored to the simple act of breathing. A flurry of replies, rejoinders, and impassioned justifications appeared in the columns of a local gazette. Words flew like arrows, protests, confutations, and indignations, all debating who had been right or wrong. It was not until the vault itself was opened to resolve the matter that the truth revealed itself. Both Mr. Windenough and I had been utterly mistaken. The argument, the struggle, the absurdity, all of it boiled down to a single undeniable fact. Neither of us had fully understood the forces we were dealing with. I cannot close the record of these extraordinary episodes in a life already overrun with oddities and calamities without reminding the reader of the power of philosophy, true, indiscriminate, and relentless philosophy. It is a shield, a guide, a light against those calamities which can neither be seen, felt, nor fully comprehended. It was this wisdom, after all, that led the ancient Hebrews to believe the gates of heaven might open for any sinner or saint who, with lungs strong and confidence unwavering, could cry the word Amen with perfect force. It was this same wisdom that when a great plague descended upon Athens and all remedies failed, inspired the philosopher Epimenides, as Laertius recounts, to erect a shrine, a temple to the proper God, offering hope when all else seemed lost. And so it was, in the end, that breath, reason, and the sheer absurdity of life itself prevailed.
And thus the story ended. If you liked this journey into the worlds of classic literature, do not forget to support us by subscribing so we can tell you more. And hey, if there's a classic tale you'd love to hear told in this suspenseful style, drop its name in the comments below. Your suggestion might be our next chilling adventure.